I'm Sam Slater from FundCalibre, and today I've been joined by Chris Ford, Lead Manager of Smith Williamson Artificial Intelligence Fund. Hi, Chris.
Morning, Sam.
And one area, obviously, at the moment where artificial intelligence is being used is healthcare, particularly for analysing the data that we need to work out how to combat COVID-19. Do you know if and how it is being used in that way? Have you heard anything? Have you had updates from your companies, maybe?
AI has been really at the heart of this. And we've seen, for example, actually at the very beginning of the outbreak, a company called Blue Dot, which is a private company, actually like using airline ticketing data and various other bits of kind of not obvious information, if you like, was able to point to a outbreak of a virus in Wuhan at the end of December last year. So well before the Chinese authorities actually came public and disclosed what was going on. So right from that point onwards, we've seen AI being at the vanguard of not only identifying the outbreaks as they occur, tracking the development of infection, but also now in the diagnosis and treatment of it, particularly in medical imaging, where various companies have launched solutions for quickly diagnosing those who have the various symptoms of COVID-19 in hospital settings. Companies such as Ping An Healthcare in China and Babylon Health here in the UK being very much in the vanguard of delivering healthcare solutions, not just to those who have coronavirus themselves, but also to the rest of the population that is now from health professionals and maybe finding it more difficult to access primary care in the way that they would normally. And then perhaps most importantly in the drug development and research process, where obviously there's a huge global effort to look for a vaccine for COVID is well understood, but the degree to which that's being enabled by AI platforms in a number of different ways, companies like AlphaFold, which is a alphabet company, so inside the same parent as Google, or Sensign here in the UK, or Clarivate providing the data set, the data sets. We're finding it all over the place. I think when we come out of this, the other side, as we will, population health is going to become a much more important component part of healthcare provision globally. It's not any longer going to be seen to be the case that you are solely responsible for your own healthcare. There's going to be a kind of collective requirement in our view. And that, of course, is absolutely a data science issue. And so there we see companies like United Health and Alphabet and also Apple participating there. And then companies like Hikvision, for example, who provide AI-enabled cameras for tracking people around as they move around buildings or in the public realm. I think that something which has been a big issue for AI has been the ethical dimension around AI, what people will tolerate in respect of the delivery of AI platforms into their lives, and where various different cultures draw the line with regard to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And I guess at one end of the spectrum lies China, stereotypically with a much more kind of authoritarian view of AI, much greater state involvement in what we would consider in the West to be personal data, and a much greater desire to capture much more data as people go about their everyday lives. On the other hand, you have maybe the European Union standing at the other end of the spectrum with GDPR, placing very significant limitations as to what can actually be done with data inside the European Union. And I think that the experience of COVID-19 really puts that very clearly on the table for discussion.
And do you think that COVID-19 could actually accelerate this change towards AI because we now perhaps see the benefits more than we have done until now? Some of the barriers might actually come down.
I think that's definitely the case. And, we see that in healthcare, certainly, but I think we also see it in lots of other parts of people's lives. We see we've all been asked to change the way in which we live very significantly over the course of the last couple of months. We're probably all doing things differently. We're probably all doing things that we've never done before and that we maybe had never particularly wanted to. And as we've been asked to do that, we've all gone away and tried to find the least disruptive and most appropriate ways to cater to ourselves and our families. And in many cases, that has led us as consumers to not just deal with healthcare in a different way, but actually experience all kinds of different things in ways that we had not previously had to. So for those who have never previously placed a order for groceries in an e-commerce context, you've probably done that in the last 8 weeks. If you didn't have a Netflix or a Disney Plus subscription, you've probably got one now. If you haven't played a computer game for a long time, well, you've probably played an awful lot more of that kind of stuff over the course of the last few months. And on the flip side, of course, is you're probably not going to the cinema, you're not going to the theatre, you're not going to the pub. It's going to be interesting to see how many of these behavioural changes actually are remarkably persistent when actually people are able to go back out again. And we suspect that not everything by any means, but some significant elements of the way in which we're now all leading our lives will be remarkably persistent at the point that we're all able to go out anyway. And so yes, and many of those services and products that we're now engaging with are able to continue to function because of their reliance on artificially intelligent platforms, that makes them less reliant on human capital and people being in the office to provide those consumer services.
So that leads quite nicely onto a number of stocks in your portfolio that are actually benefiting from lockdown at the moment. That includes Ocado, Netflix, and Activision Blizzard, the video gaming company. Could you perhaps talk us through how those particular companies use AI?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with Ocado because I think it's one that will be very familiar to many people here in the UK, and they use AI all over their business. They use AI from using machine learning to optimize their delivery routes on the fly. They use AI to create personalized stores for each consumer so that your experience as a consumer will be different from my experience as a consumer. And the idea there is to make sure that we all have as efficient and enjoyable experience as shopping can ever be. But then, of course, all of their pick and pack is done robotically, and all of those robots are controlled using artificially intelligent platforms, and a huge amount of modeling is done in the background to help them continue to improve the management of their distribution centers. And they do it using an AI platform and a virtual environment, of course, to ensure that once they do then roll that out in the real world, that those solutions actually work extremely, extremely well, and mistakes have been made in a virtual environment rather than a real world environment. So Ocado is a company which is, has AI absolutely through to its core, in our view. And we're just now beginning to think beyond what the opportunities in grocery might be for Ocado to the opportunities in places, things like dark kitchens for takeaway food, or vertical farming, or indeed even in the automated vehicular world, where the opportunity to use some of Ocado's route planning and distribution management soft platform to allow automated vehicles to move around densely populated cities like London is quite an interesting leading edge opportunity for the company to consider. So, at the moment, obviously, Ocado is benefiting from the e-commerce trade and grocery, but actually we think what's being demonstrated here is the viability of the platform. The question for us is how broad can that platform then become over the course of the next few years. For Netflix, it's a company which can really do what it does because of the use of the artificially intelligent platforms upon which it stands. So AI is used in Netflix in the first instance in the way that we all engage with Netflix's content. So the way in which content is recommended to you, the way in which content is presented to you, will be almost entirely dependent on your behavior in engaging with all the previous content that you've engaged with on Netflix. Even to the point that the same piece of content might be presented very differently to different consumers. So, for example, if you're watching Pulp Fiction and you've previously watched a load of Picklet films, then you'll be presented a picture of the leading actress on the kind of front page. On the other hand, if you've spent the last 6 months watching gangster movies, then you'll have a picture of John Travolta and some of the male actors. And so the way, it's not just specific content, it's the way the content is personalized for you. And of course, if the content is personalized well, then it makes you much more likely to engage on that piece of content rather than some other. But of course, as a function of that understanding of their audience, Netflix has a very keen understanding of not just how the content will be engaged with in its existing state, but also how new content can be and should be provided to audiences to take account of trending changes in audience taste. And so, and because they control such a lot of their own content production, they can very quickly put into the market content which caters to a particular, perhaps even relatively transient taste in the market, which because of the lead times for other content producers would be very difficult for them to case to. And then without going into too much technical detail, there's also a huge amount of AI which sits in the background at Netflix, which allows them to deliver the content to you in a really efficient manner so that you don't have the horrible little kind of thing going round and round in the middle of your screen while the next piece of content suffers. And they do that with some very powerful network management AI, which sits in the background, which none of us ever kind of think about when we're looking at the content, but which is really critical to the overall user experience of Netflix. And so gaming has been absolutely kind of identified with AI for a long period of time. And Activision and EA and Ubisoft, all of these companies, use AI within their games in a number of different ways, most notably and long-standingly, I suppose, in respect of the creation of the opponents with whom you might be fighting a battle or competing with inside the game itself. So AI is absolutely at the heart of what allows computer gaming to be enjoyable. Something which has changed a little bit, though, as a result of the trend towards massively multiplayer online games over the course of the last few years, has been that the requirement to find ways to bring disparate groups of people to compete in online games in the same space, virtual space, has become, again, a key feature. If you are a relative beginner to a game, the last thing you want to do is find yourself playing with people who've been playing the game for 5 years and you just get killed immediately. And so some of the AI, which is developed now by Activision and others, is all about player matching and making sure that you have the right experience in game. Again, like Netflix, it's all about driving consumer engagement, and the more engaged you can allow consumers to be by giving them the best experience, and then the most enjoyable experience you can have, the more likely they are to spend time in the game.
And one of the criticisms of AI that I've heard is that sometimes human emotion is actually quite necessary to make decisions about things. So I attended a conference before lockdown where someone was saying that there's the obvious example of where sat-nav can sometimes make drivers drive into a river because it doesn't know that a bridge has moved or something. But there were other examples of where they were talking about automated driving, and until recently they'd had the AI doing the brunt of the work and then left it to the human to intervene if there was an emergency. But actually it was the wrong way round because humans are terrible in emergencies. They don't react enough, etc., whereas the AI does. So they were talking about reversing it so that you would have a human doing most things, but the AI kicked in earlier to avoid accidents. And they had some brilliant video showing how this was possible. And also in the justice system, I believe, where they were using AI to predict whether a criminal was likely to commit crimes again in the future and things. But you had to have a judge actually step in and look at the nuances a bit more. So from an investment point of view, how early would you get involved in companies using AI? Because there would obviously be some of these risks, or do you kind of get involved once the AI has been thoroughly tested, etc.? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's partly of necessity. Our fund is a fund that invests only in publicly quoted businesses. And so one of the kind of necessities of that is that we are of our own nature investing in things which to some extent have already been proven, because if it's already being done in a public context, then it's already gone quite a long way. In the private market, I think there are very significant risks of backing the wrong horse, if you like, and backing an early stage technology which doesn't end up being productive. But I think what you highlight is very much a feature of the AI space, and something which I find extremely exciting. And that is that we've talked a little bit about some of the ways in which AI is already embedded in our lives today and how we're engaging with it. But, we are absolutely in the foothills. For everything that we engage with today, we can all imagine that the 10, 20, 50 different better engagements with AI over the course of the next few years. So I think it's appropriate that for every person who is minded to say, isn't it brilliant that Tesla, you can drive your Tesla in an automated fashion down the highway in California, there's somebody else that's prepared to say, hang on a second, we shouldn't be doing that because these are the reasons. Because all of the reasons that are then outlined are the things that AI needs to now be addressing next. And so I think that what you talk about here is the future opportunity from AI, which I think if we had said thought to ourselves, 10, 15 years ago that we could engage with AI in the way that we now do in such a relatively short period of time. Our prior selves would have been shocked to discover what's been delivered in such a relatively short period. We tend as humans to overestimate what can be delivered in a very short period of time, but very significantly underestimate what can be delivered, achieved in a slightly longer period of time. And I think that's really what we're seeing with the AI space. It's extraordinary that there are cars at all that can drive all the way across the United States without any human intervention. It's a shame that we can't all use the technology today because it's not yet ready, but isn't it great that we're in a position that we can think that we might be able to in the course of the next 10 years? The other, the issue that you brought up in the justice space is an interesting one. AI is definitely going to be used in the world's policing and enforcement and justice over the course of the next decades. We are not interested at the moment in the use of AI. We have no position in the portfolio that looks to use AI to arbitrate on single-handedly on issues of justice and its implementation. But it is also the case that if you look elsewhere in the justice system, artificial intelligence platforms are being used to do very significant amounts of heavy lifting ahead of in the course of preparing for cases in front of the courts. So sifting through huge amounts of data pertinent to a particular case, doing kind of discovery work ahead of figuring out what's relevant, what's not relevant. And that's very considerably cutting costs to consumers, cutting costs, of course, and making more efficient for the lawyers themselves. But keeping a lid on the costs associated with sifting through what's relevant for a particular case is a very, very important consideration when data is now being captured in the criminal justice system at a faster and faster rate, just as it is in any other part of life. So a company that we do invest in, for example, is a company called Axon Technologies. And Axon is a company which has the leading platform for the management of evidence. And they provide first responders, not just police forces, but also ambulance teams, search and rescue and so on, with cameras that capture image in real time, feed that back over wireless networks to the central servers, and then allow you to sift through that data, manage that data in a much more perspicacious and efficient manner than would be the case you doing everything on paper. And that's important, of course, in the case of first responders, because what we want is our human first responders to be out on the street using the judgment that you kind of mentioned earlier as to where they should and should not intervene. We don't want to be giving that to the AI yet, but what we can use AI for is to allow those people not to be back at their desks slavishly writing up reports, but we'd far rather that they were out there embedded in their communities. So, AI needs governing. But the fact that it needs governing is a proposition that as humans we are fairly good at tackling. We're good at putting regulation in place to ensure that things are done in the way that we want to. And all of this is a part of making sure that the AI works in the best interest of the humans.
That's brilliant stuff. Thank you very much, Chris. I could talk to you for hours about this. Anyway, thank you very much for your time.
That's quite right.
If our listeners would like to find out more about the Smith Williamson Artificial Intelligence Fund, please go to FundCalibre.com and please subscribe to the Investing on the Go podcast. Thank you very much. Please note that these are unprecedented times and markets can react very quickly to news. The views expressed are at the time of recording and could change. Please remember we've been discussing individual stocks to bring investing to life for you. It's not a recommendation to buy or to sell. The fund may or may not still hold these stocks at the time of your listening.